death, taxes, and the Jets being a complete, utter mess. And this year is the same as every other year that I've watched football besides 2009 and 2010, in which the Jets just can't get out of their own way. And we all thought this year would be different with the addition of Aaron Rodgers, with the addition of Allen Lazard, with the drafting of multiple studs over the last 2 years. This season felt different. From Hard Knocks all the way until that fourth play of the season, the Jets looked prime for success. And look where we're at right now. Back to square one. Going to get into a lot about the Jets. We're going to talk about Robert Saleh and his job and what he's done, whether or not he deserves to stay on. We'll talk about Joe Douglas, and I'm going to comment a little bit about the Giants, all that and more coming up next on the BG Show. All right, episode 13, I believe, of the BG Show here, and it is Wednesday, December 20th, and nothing has changed for the Jets organization in an extremely long period of time. And I can feel for the fans, and I've mentioned this a bunch before, that I root for the Jets. I am a Giants fan, but I do root for the Jets, and I do keep in touch with multiple Jets fans who give me, the accurate pulse of the Jet fan. Of course, I listen to WFAN. I listen to all different podcasts and radio stations, and whoever talks about the Jets. I want to know just as much about the Jets as I possibly can know. And right now, I don't think I need anyone else to tell me exactly what I'm seeing with my own two eyes. And that's an incompetent organization that cannot get out of its own way. And it's the same in 2023 this year as it has been in 2011, 12, 13, 14, And right now, there are a lot of questions being asked by Jets fans, probably by Jets players on the inside, maybe by Woody Johnson himself, of whether or not this hierarchy of the GM and the head coach are actually fit to lead this team to success. And as I mentioned, this season, obviously a lot happened. With the Aaron Rodgers injury, with Elijah Vera Tucker going down, with Mekhi Becton being extremely shaky and inconsistent. But one thing has remained true, and which has been even more revealed true in these past few weeks, that the Jets roster was not built for a Super Bowl like everyone believed the roster to be. Their offensive line is still awful. Simply put, it's not good. And everyone knew that this was going to be the Achilles heel of the Jets, and it has been, and then some. And can you imagine putting Aaron Rodgers out there? It took 4 plays for him to tear his Achilles. Imagine what would have happened in hundreds of plays. How many huge hits he would have taken. If this makes any Jets fan feel better, then, take it in, absorb it, and understand that with Aaron Rodgers, this team is only slightly and marginally better and might not even make the playoffs. The receivers have been awful outside of Garrett Wilson. Allen Lazard has been a complete disaster of a contract. The fact that you're throwing out Randall Cobb in any game shows you how bad your depth is. This has been such a tough process, I can imagine, for Jets fans. Because now you're dealing with potentially wanting to fire another head coach, another GM, and repeat this same old cycle like it has been multiple times throughout the almost 60 years of Jets history. When is it going to stop? That's the only thing I have against firing Robert Saleh, who I believe should go. His 16-32 record, 33% winning percentage. 33%. And you look at that, and you look at the roster he's been dealt, and you could say, okay, it's the same old Jets. They don't really have much. But it doesn't excuse a terrible record like that. And it's a different situation for the Giants, at least in the middle of the year when people were questioning the job that Brian Daboll was doing. But he had the coach of the year before on a roster arguably worse than the Jets roster in 2022. But the Giants still advanced the playoffs. They won a game. And they went into this year with high hopes and expectations, just like the Jets did. And honestly, with a worse roster than the Jets. They're exceeding everything that the Jets have put out there, the product that they put out in the field, the drama, the whatever, whatever you want to name it. It's been a constant stream of negativity and incompetence from this organization since the fourth play in the season. And right now, as I mentioned, there are a lot of Jets fans who are conflicted. I have some friends telling me that they think that Robert Saleh should go, but Joe Douglas should stay. I have other friends saying that everyone should stay. But right now, it's it's really insane that we are in this position yet again, where another regime has come and another regime could go in just a short period of time. And it begs the question, and I know I've done a pretty knock-up job of leading up to it, of does Robert Saleh deserve to stay on as Jets head coach? I don't think so. For the sake of keeping at least some continuity and not throwing out another head coach in this organization, I think no. But I think just solely based off his merits and solely based off his performance as head coach, what he said, the whole Zach Wilson incident, I think he deserves to be fired. And from the start of this year, the second that Zach Wilson steps in as quarterback, the second you see on the sideline Robert Saleh with that 1,000-yard stare after Aaron Rodgers got hurt, everything has gone downhill. And yes, the Jets did win that game against the Bills, and everything was looking up for some fans. And for the smarter fans, the ones who realize this is the Jets we're talking about, realize that this season is probably over without Aaron Rodgers under center. And listen, it's been 3 years now of Robert Saleh. And I think that this year has been the biggest indictment on the job that he has done as Jets head coach. From publicly backing Zach Wilson, but very obviously not wanting to play Zach Wilson, then to finally get his wish of benching Zach Wilson just to be proven wrong and have to put him back into the lineup 3 weeks later. So I think Saleh at every end has looked like a clown. And I don't throw words out like that. I don't throw adjectives out like that. And I wouldn't call him a clown if I didn't actually believe that the job he's been doing has not been a stand-up job. And from the start, from the opening scene of Hard Knocks, you could tell that it didn't really look like his team. It looked like Aaron Rodgers' team. And it almost looked like he was like, all right, all of the blame, everything else that is going to be placed on me this year is going to be completely absolved because Aaron Rodgers is going to lead us to the promised land. We've got Dalvin Cook in here. We've got this awesome roster of skilled players, and I will not have to deal with another terrible season. And this season has been an utter disaster. I feel bad for Robert Saleh. I feel bad for any Jets fans. I feel bad for Joe Douglas. And speaking of Joe Douglas, when you talk about Saleh's job and his security, you got to talk about Joe Douglas, who has done a pretty solid job drafting in the last 2 years, but specifically in the first 2 rounds. He has done an awful job at assembling a competent offensive line, which has shown this year. And again, as I said, outside of the second round, he doesn't have anything to show for. There was a time this offseason that a lot of people thought this Jets team was in a perfect position to go out and win a Super Bowl. But again, quickly, it was shown to everyone who follows the game of football that the Jets' offensive line was just not good enough. It was simply not good enough. The third receiver was not good enough. Allen Lazard had one of the worst seasons statistically that I have seen in wide receiver NFL history. So there was this, this sentiment regarding the team that this excitement, this hope that Joe Douglas assembled the perfect roster. And don't get me wrong, his draft class in 2022, there's no team without that, without Breece Hall, without Sauce, and without Garrett. There's no team without that. Full stop. No team. You bring in Aaron Rodgers, you still have no Super Bowl aspirations. Aaron Rodgers doesn't want to come to your team without that draft class. But if you look past that, at the lineman that he has drafted, first off, in that 2022 draft, one lineman drafted. One. It was Max Mitchell in the 4th round. And in 2023, he got Joe Tippmann, who has actually looked pretty solid, all things considered, being thrust into a starting position pretty early this year. Besides that, what do you have to show? You haven't done a good enough job assembling an offensive line. And it brings me back to talking about the Giants and comparing the Jets and the Giants, but the Giants have had the same problem. And early on in the season, they couldn't win a game because they couldn't block. And then as the season went on, they signed Justin Pugh. They looked a little bit more competent on the offensive line, and they were able to piece things together. And the Jets team, they've looked better and better, but then you get absolutely destroyed against the Dolphins yet again. And that's another knock on Robert Saleh, not necessarily Joe Douglas. The fact that Robert Saleh has yet to beat the Patriots, has gotten blown out by the Dolphins, especially a Dolphins team this past week without Tyreek Hill, a beat-up Dolphins team that still shut you out. There's no excuses if you're Robert Saleh. And if I were Woody Johnson, first off, I'd sell the team and get as far away from the team as possible. We all know that that's not happening. What I would do is I would go to Joe Douglas and say, listen, Joe, I want to get rid of Robert Saleh. If you want to stick with him and you still back him as head coach and you're going to go down without the ship, you're going to go down with the ship, then you could go too. And at that point, you restart, you regroup. And it's unfortunate right now that Woody Johnson's not the one pulling the strings. It's Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers, who is on the 53-man roster, taking up a valuable roster spot for another Jet, and he won't play the rest of the year. It makes no sense to me. It's mind-numbing what decisions the Jets have made in the last few years. It's whatever Aaron Rodgers wants at this point. Whether he wants to keep Nate Hackett, whether he wants to keep Douglas, whether he wants to keep Saleh. And from what I have gathered, and from what I've heard from reporters, it seems like this Jets team is going to run it back next year. The exact same way, with the same personnel, hopefully not, but with the same coaching staff, with the same GM. And I don't know how I would feel if I were a Jets fan with that possibility looming. With that possibility likely, I think it would benefit the Jets to actually go out and get a solid offensive head coach. And not for the, we're looking back 10, 15 years. Rex Ryan, they had their most success under Rex Ryan, defensive-minded head coach. Their least success with Adam Gase as an offensive-minded head coach. They need a Sean McVay. They need someone like that, a Kyle Shanahan, a guy who could come in, completely revamp this offense, could completely revamp whatever schemes the Jets have going on. Because as of right now, Nate Hackett looks like you know what. He looks incompetent. He looks like he completely mailed it in this entire year. That he was expecting, like everyone else, Aaron Rodgers to play. And once Aaron Rodgers went down, it looked like he wanted nothing to do with putting Zach Wilson in a situation where he could succeed in that offense. Huge indictment on not only Saleh, but Hackett as well, who's been calling the plays this entire year. And there have been multiple games where the Jets have looked completely deflated on the offensive end. The play calling, the actual execution of the plays has looked awful. That's an indictment on the offensive coordinator. So right now, it's not a good look for all of all of the parties involved, especially Woody Johnson. But that's who the Jets are. And going forward, if I were the Jets, I'd clean house. I'd keep Joe Douglas because besides the Zach Wilson pick and besides all the duds following the third round in these drafts, Joe Douglas has done a pretty solid job. And he should be given at least one more offseason to actually shape up this offense and put them in a position with Aaron Rodgers to win. Because according to reports, you got Aaron Rodgers for another 2 years. You have no idea what kind of player he's going to be coming off the injury, but you have him for 2 more years. And it can't be worse than whatever you had before. All right. I want to move into the Giants quickly. I was, wanted to keep this episode relatively short. The Giants are out of it. They're done. The season is over. All the hype was for nothing. And now the Giants are at 5-9 and desperately need as good a pick as possible because, as I mentioned multiple times throughout this year, their roster has a lot of holes to fill. The defense has looked extremely solid, just like it did last year, maybe even better. Their offensive line is still the same piece of garbage that they've been dealing with for the past 6-7 years. And the quarterback situation is a major question mark. But what each and every quarterback who's come into each and every single one of these games, the 3 quarterbacks, has shown you is that we can all sit back as Giants fans and trust the guys in charge. Trust Brian Daboll. Realize that there is a reason why he got Coach of the Year last year. Because he's an awesome offensive mind. That he knows how to put, and Kafka too. You can't leave Kafka out of this equation. That both of these guys know how to put their quarterbacks in positions to win. Just look at what Tommy DeVito has done. And Tommy DeVito is a serviceable backup in this league. He's not a starting quarterback. And he's looked like a starting quarterback under this offense and under these 2 coaches who are great offensive minds. So if you're a Giants fan, start rooting for them to lose because that's the only way the Giants are going to be in a better position to win next year. That's if they have the best possible draft pick to take an offensive lineman, to take a quarterback, to potentially trade up, to get someone else. That is where we're at with the Giants. That's the state of New York Giants. And I'd much rather be a Giants fan, which I am, and much rather be in a position like the New York Giants over the New York Jets because there's a lot of question marks for both teams. The Jets have the more sure option in Aaron Rodgers, but again, he's coming off this injury. Their offensive line looks terrible, and they have no receivers outside of Garrett Wilson. So both teams are in, as always, this terrible situation that's just so often the state of New York football. But I would much rather be the New York Giants right now. Both teams should lose, though. Both teams, no excuses, should go out. And, the players would never try to lose on their own. But the coaches write up some schemes that are guaranteed to lose you these games because the better the draft pick, the better position both these teams are in next year. All right, that will do it for this episode of the BG Show. I have a little surprise coming for you all later. I know it's been a while since I had my last guest on. I have some guests in the works for these next coming episodes, so stay tuned for that. And thank you all very much for listening and tuning in to the BG Show. I'm Bryce Gelman. See you all later this week.